I'm Rick from Cartridge Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on the 69 Firebird. As you can see, we have the whole external body kind of test fit and clamped on this car. On this video, we're going to do a part where we're going to put a roll cage in a car and we're going to finish it off with subframe connectors. Now saying that, it's going to be tied in with the other video on putting the external body parts on the car, because you'll see we're going to test fit the car now with the body parts just where we think they're going to go. Everything fits pretty well and I'm happy with the general fitment. And then once we get the cage tacked in place and everything, we're going to pull the body apart. And then we're going to go ahead and weld the cage on the areas that we can't get to. Then I'm going to go ahead and install the body. That's going to be a separate video. And then we'll come back and finish some supports and our subframe connectors at the bottom. So bear with me. This video is going to be filmed in 2 separate times with some time in between, because this is kind of a side project since it's my car. So what we're going to do, we're using 4130 chromoly tubing. This bar right here is 093, and I actually got this. It's a Jegster main hoop cage. It came with the halo bar up here and the main roll bar. Now, why I bought the Jegster cage versus bending my own kit, even though I think my own kit would probably fit a little better in the car, was just no one locally had a long enough piece of roll cage in chromoly or even mild steel, 1 5/8 or even 1 3/4. It was going to cost too much for a DOM chromoly cage, where it was a whole lot cheaper to just go ahead and buy this kit and have it shipped to us. Now, I'm not using the halo bar. We have scrap chromoly, and then what I did, I bought separate run sections down here. This is going to be 083 wall chromoly. So we're going to weld both these together. I'm going to go over some chromoly 4130 settings. I am not we're not building a pro mod cage here. We're not building NHRA certified anything. So take these steps for your build if you want. Be aware that there's some stuff though that would not fly in a certified cage, you know, where we're going to put angles in certain areas and distances. So again, this is more for your home hot rod build, more for how to go about some tips and tricks welding the chromoly, how we do it. Again, I don't do chromoly all the time, but now I've done enough TIG stuff that I think we could pull it off all right. So we got our plating down there too. I'm going to show you what this Jegster, if you're interested in this kit, I'm going to test fit this in the car first. I'm going to show you how we're going to modify it. And we also have a 69 Camaro in the shop, and the owner was nice enough to let me borrow his rear seat, and he's got a one-piece headliner. I believe it's a TMI headliner. So we're going to use that to mock up, because again, this isn't a race car. We're kind of just doing this as a street strip, kind of have fun car, you know, anything we want to do, drive around and just to support. So I want to put a headliner and full interior of the car. So stay tuned. Let's go ahead and test fit this cage and start some of the process on what we're going to do. So this is the first time I've ever actually tried to use one of these one-piece headliners, and I must say I'm actually really happy with the quality of it. I'm pretty committed to this headliner, even though I'm borrowing it now, because we are fitting the cage around it. I might just try to stick the old bow headliner that came out of this car up in the car just to see what it looks like, but honestly, for the modern look, I think this is the way to go. Now we're going to turn our attention on the chromoly, the 4130 main hoop bar. The Jegster cage, they send the main hoop a lot taller than you really need. So I already took some measurements in the car, and I know we're going to take initially 1.5 inches off of it just to fit it in the car and stand it up. You can see right now, this is going to be the first fitment of the car once we cut the bottom legs off, and you see how it's kind of bowed in a little bit. We're going to fix that, and we're going to bow the cage all the way out. I like the cage going as wide as possible. I know a lot of times with, you know, some of the drag cars, they do curve in like that. I really think if we put this cage though with some plating above the rockers, on top of the rocker support bracket, under the inner rocker support bracket, is going to be the strongest place for a fun street strip cage. I'm right now taking my measurements so I get my cage flat. I lifted it up a little bit to get it up high right against the headliner, where I still have enough room to get the headliner in and out, but we can cut the cage to length before we start pushing it out. So we're going to go ahead and just cut the tubes just like we did before. I'm using tape around the bottom just for a straight cut all the way around, since a round bar, so the tape gives me an even mark that I know to cut off of. We'll come back through at the very end and grind it to the edges of the doors. A couple things about chromoly and why I chose chromoly. Basically, chromoly and mild steel, what a big misconception is that people has is they think that chromoly is a lot lighter. In reality, chromoly and mild steel have the same size, weight per thickness and everything else, but chromoly basically has a better strength to weight ratio. So in general, you could run a thinner wall tube and have the same amount of protection. So like right here, we're running an 096 wall tube, an 083 wall tube, where equivalent tube might be a 120 wall DOM mild steel. Now, back to what I'm doing right now, I'm actually cutting the rockers out, like I said earlier, where we taken the lip off, and this is where I plan on putting my roll cage. Underneath here, there's an inner rocker brace. So if the rocker is a thicker metal than it would be the actual floor pan, and then in the middle of it, we have this inner rocker brace. Like I said, the roll cage is actually curved in a little bit too much from the Jegster kit that they sent. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a porta power on this thing, and we'll just push this cage back out a little bit. So you see, pushing it out right now is going to get us in the right place, right where I want to be, laying above the rockers. And then what I did, we have a little bit of room up top. When I put my plate in there, that's going to lift up the cage, the main hoop, just a little bit. We're just playing with this. I'm kind of getting some ideas. Again, I didn't bend this main hoop, so I'm kind of at the mercy on what the people who designed the kit for this car wanted it to go. I am happy where they decided to put it. I think it fits pretty good in general. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm basically putting the crossbar between the main hoop. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm taking one of those 8-foot sticks that I had shipped out, and we're just taking the hole saw. So this is 1 5/8 hole saw. We're going to run this right down the chromoly, and we're going to get a good tight cut initially. I'm still gonna have to come through and clean up and deburr all the edges with I'm using a flap disc is what I'm gonna use, a DA on the edges, just to get everything a little bit finer. What we want to do with the chromoly, we really need our gaps to be close to zero. Chromoly is very susceptible to heat, and it makes it really brittle. So what we're trying to do, if we get a tight gap, then we can sit there and we can have less filler being added, less heat being added in the whole process. And that's going to make the chromoly stronger and the weld a lot better. This is also another reason why MIG is not really the most preferred method for chromoly. You can do it, but it's not ideal because you're just putting too much heat into it, and you can't control the arc or the heat like we're going to be able to do with the TIG welder. You could see what I was saying earlier. I'm coming through here with a flap disc. Right now we got our general 1 5/8 opening fit up against the main hoop, and it still curves in a little bit, so I was just marking it, and I'm just using the flap wheel to just grind it out a little bit. The main thing you need to do now, you also have to get the mill scale off this. When you're welding chromoly, and then you're going to go over it with an acetone, just really clean everything up. I also want to use acetone on my filler rod, which for the filler rod, we're going to be using ER70S-2. Another acceptable filler rod is going to be ER80S-2. I went with the 70-2 since I have it on hand. It's not going to be as strong as the ER80S-2, but the amount we're going to pack in there is going to be far more acceptable than we really need. We're also going to be using 16th inch filler rod. That's going to again be smaller than the material that we're welding and keep the heat out of it. Another thing with the chromoly is, as long as the material is 60 degrees and it's under 120 wall tubing, which could be most roll cages, you don't need to preheat the metal. We can go ahead and just weld it right up after we tack it. You can see I'm test fitting the bar into place, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to let out the porta power, and that's holding everything where I want it. I'm going to come back through and just measure everything and make sure I'm straight. I'm also just cleaning it up one more time with the red Scotch-Brite before we put some more acetone on it and start welding. All right, so we basically got both sides measured up, same height from the bottom, same height from the top. I also took a digital level and verified we're 0.2 there, and then this top curves a little bit, but if we go in the center, we're about 0, and you see 0.5. So like I said, in general, this is pretty level, 0.2 degrees. We're gonna go ahead and shim it after and kind of just double check everything. But I'm happy with that. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna tack it up. What we're basically using, let me get it out. We're using the TIG torch. So you have to TIG weld chromoly. We're gonna use a 3/32 serrated tungsten. We're using 16-inch filler rod ER70-2. So this is basically a mild steel rod. So chromoly has its high strength tensile. If we were going to add a chromoly filler in here, basically it would be too brittle and too hard. We're trying to control the heat, plus the added thickness of this rod will give us an easier weld area and almost be just as strong as a chromoly. So this is our choice material. I'm using a number 12. I'm using a Furic cup just for good gas coverage, so I can have my stick out longer in a lot of these areas right here. That's the whole idea right there to get in there. So we're basically running one amp for every thousandth of an inch. So 0.93 thousandths is what this was, 0.83. I'll set my TIG welder to 95 amps. We're running a foot pedal, so we're basically going to try to control the heat, keep it cool, and we're just right now tacking this up to get it out. So let's see what we got. Let me get in a comfortable position and let's try to TIG weld. So we're welding with 100% argon, of course. I'm using my gas flow at 20 to 25 CFH, like I said, on this number 12 cup with a gas lens. And then what I'm doing, I'm holding the torch over the area a little bit longer to make sure it cools down and we get impurities out of it. That's very important, to cool the weld slow. So when we actually weld, you'll see we're going to try to hold that area and hold our filler material over the gas too to stop it from getting impurities. All right, I got it tacked all the way around. Let's go do the other side. The whole idea, you want to keep the post flow on it and you want a really tight fitment here. So let's go to the other side and we'll keep tacking it. We'll pull this roll cage out and we'll do some TIG welding. Be aware when tacking chromoly, you might have to do it in a couple spots, and what you can't do, like if you're mild steel and this was a DOM roll cage, you could kind of tack and kind of manipulate the bars a little bit. Chromoly will instantaneously snap. So once it's in place, that's where it stays. You can't try to move it at all. So what we're doing right now, I'm going to give you a couple arc shots the best we can. You could see how close I am to material on my 3/16 serrated tungsten. You could see I'm at a 60-degree tip. Tungsten itself with the number 12 cup, it's going to allow me a little bit more stick out to really get in between two coping joints or pipe joints and everything else and really get the gas flowing in there. Also, you can see feeding my filler really slow. It's hard to tell. I wish I had an amp shot right here, but I'm pulsing the pedal as I'm coming in to, again, try to keep the heat out of it. You can see I'm adjusting. So getting the torch angle is really the key to walking the puddle and how your input comes into here. So being that this is a pipe in a round area, it's going to be really hard to reach certain areas. So this is actually the easiest weld we're going to do in this whole process, because the rest of it's got to be done in the car, upside down, in the most uncomfortable angles. But this is the idea on how you would do it on a bench. You could see I'm getting my tungsten just out far enough where everything fits good. I'm getting it close. Like I said, walk in the puddle. We're obviously speeding up this process right here just so you can see it. And then once I hit the top, I'm readjusting myself and I'm kind of back playing on the puddle and then walking it back forward to give it a really smooth transition. So now that we're going back and we're waiting on our main hoop to dry, I'm going to go right now and we're going to finish welding our rocker area. So this car is still not completely assembled, like I said earlier in the video. So what we're going to do right now is, since the cage is going here, we need to weld in the inner rocker that you can't see to both the outer rocker and the inner rocker of the 69 Firebirds. So I'm doing that right now, and I'm welding down the butt joint of both those rockers. That's going to give us a really strong base. So when we put our plate material in there, it's going to have something to sit on. So the plate material we're going to use is 3/16. I have it laying around. I just felt like right here, I wanted to overkill it, and I wanted my bar to just come up a little bit higher in the roof line. So 3/16 was the reason I did that. I cranked up my power, and we're gonna run it right down the whole sides of both sides of the rocker. You can see I did another side gusset just so I incorporate both areas of the rocker, because the bar is going to be a little bit further on the inside of the plate. So that's going to help really strengthen up the load and not put it on just one part of the rocker. I think this is overkill for a roll bar in kind of a street car, but really when you're building race cars, I think all these cages are tied into chassis components. I mean, it really should be anyway. If nothing else, you should make sure there is at least some plate spread out on the floor. You never want to put a roll bar directly over sheet metal. As soon as you say roll over, that's going to go right through the floor. So really, I like to tie them into chassis components. The rockers are really strong to start out, and you're going to see how we're going to tie this in the future into the subframe connectors to really make this extra strong. So what I'm doing right now, we're going to bend our two down tubes. So this is a JD squared manual pipe bender with 1 5/8 non-kink die in it. I believe, if I remember right, it's a 5-inch radius is what I have. So what I'm doing, I'm just bending these. I believe it was 35 degrees. I took a measurement. Basically, the down angle I wanted to go, since the top was straight across, so I used an angle finder. And then basically, I went up there, I bent it, held it up to the car, went in the car, and then once I got my first measurement, I don't know if you could see it on the bottom right, there's a little piece of welding rod that on the bottom has scale that I know exactly how far I am bending. So I just matched the second side with the first side. In the back right now, you could see I'm not using 3/16 plate. I'm using 1/8 plate, just because the back of this cage, you're going to see how we're going to do it. We're going to do some strong down tubes go into the shock tower braces, and then really the back of this, there's no leaf springs back here in the car. The back of this cage is really just going to be for stiffening it up. And I guess if a cage did get rear-ended, that's going to hold the plates to the frame rails itself. But really, I don't believe this part of the cage, as far as the safety concerned in my car, is the most important on how else I'm going to design it. So again, I think this plate right here, what we're doing, is more than acceptable even in a competition style environment. Now, speaking of a competition style environment, what you don't see right now is you don't see any gussets on this cage. If I was building this cage as a performance cage or something that we're going to race, it's got to meet a spec, there's going to be a lot of gussets on them and all these bars. I feel like gussets are very important on those cages. What we're doing right now, like I said, this is more of a show, fun. You know, I always envision a cage in this car, so we're just putting one in there. So I could always go back down the road and add some gussets, but I think right now I'm happy with how this cage is going to turn out and really what it's doing. Also, I believe, someone might be able to correct me wrong, but I don't believe you're allowed to have the kink bars in an NHRA cage, and actually a lot of sanctioned bodies don't like the two down tubes going up and back down. A lot of them like them going straight up from the back area to the bars. But to me, I need to get this above the back seat and out of the way. Not that we're going to incorporate the back seat with people there, but really I just think from a aesthetic pleasing portion, I think it's going to look good on this car when it gives kind of that pro touring modern look. So what we're doing right now, we just threw the two bars up there, and I'm doing the same thing I did with the crossbar. We're just going to tack into place real quick. I'm putting 3 tacks in it. Chase is just helping me because with the filler rod, it's very hard to get up here. I do have some clamps, but it's easier for me to just grab him. He should be wearing long sleeves and he's not looking, but really, at the 2 or 3 tacks we're going to put in, it's not the end of the world. What I'm doing though, I'm verifying right now both sides are 100% level, even, and I'm just, like I said, we're just tacking this. So I'm going to go through right now. I'm going to look at everything, take all my measurements, because once we weld it in, there's no moving this thing at all. Same thing in the back. We just got to make sure we're side to side at the right angle and we're pushed down all the way. What I did for those back angles, I basically just took, again, a straight edge off the seat pan, kind of like I did with the main hoop, and I basically cut my angle into it, and then I took a grinder and just ground down the edges to make it fit perfect over the steel plate. Same thing what I said earlier. Now we're to the harder parts of the welding. Right now this is going to be where you're really uncomfortable. I'm still using a foot pedal right here because I'm able to get standing up and kind of working around. I am in a little bit going to switch to a trigger switch and just run all, I think it was 90 amps at this roll cage. What I did then to control the heat was just use it with my speed of how fast I'm filling it. It doesn't make as clean of a weld, but in general, it's what you have to do when you're upside down backwards in a car and you don't feel like taping the foot pedal to your foot and can't hold it up somewhere. What I'm going to do now, so these plates are mild steel. The roll cage is Chromoly 4130. We're going to use, again, the ER70S-2, and this is how we're going to join both of those together. I will say, if you're welding ER80S-2, you probably want to use the ER70S-2 for the mild steel to chromoly application because that's the same material. I'm going to show you earlier kind of how I did the down tubes and what I was thinking. So I'm going to sit here and I put the digital angle finder on the down tubes. That's going to give me my joint angle for my 2 down supports that we're going to put into this giant thick shock cross member brace. So what I'm doing right now on my tubing notcher, I'm basically set it for 30 degrees again is what it was, and once I get to 30 degrees I'm going to go ahead and run my tubing notcher right down. I'm also leaving this tube longer and I'm going to come back through once I'm done notching to make it easier for me, and then we're going to measure out the bottom, and then again same thing I said earlier, we'll just keep grinding because we want, again, really tight fit in everything else here. You could see how tight this is and why I was saying the back of that plating isn't as crucial in this cage, I feel, as these shock tower support cross beams. So this is going from the frame rails, is going to be the shock and where all the suspension is. This, I believe, is going to be the heart of stiffening up this whole rear end of the car and tying it into the front portion of it, which you'll see a little bit earlier down the road. So same thing what I'm doing right now, I'm on the trigger switch because I can't reach my foot pedal. I'm kind of upside down in this certain area. So we're going to try get in these areas as best we can. With the TIG torch, we're not going to be able to reach in there all the way. We're just too tight against the outer wheel housing with the mini tubs and everything here. But it's all right. We'll get everything tied in. This car's not going to move. You can see I ground down all the epoxy. Same thing, I prepped the rest of the area, cleaned it with acetone, everything else before we weld. So we'll go ahead and weld this up and we'll start working our way forward. We got most of the back area done on the Firebird roll cage. I do have to blow the whole car apart to be able to TIG weld inside those areas on the other side of them, take the wheel houses out. So saying that, what we're going to do right now, I know everything on the external panel is test fit, and we're going to change the plan a little bit because I just want to finish the cage at this point. We're on a frame jig, the car's not going to move, all the panels fit well, so we're going to go ahead and install the Detroit Speed subframe connectors. I've installed these in the past and I really like them. And then we're going to go ahead as a final step and tie our cage into these subframe connectors. That's just going to stiffen up the whole car. We're going to leave it on the frame jig and then we're going to blow the whole car apart, prime in here and everything else. So we're gonna follow the directions. I'm gonna just take you through it. It's not gonna be a step-by-step process because I don't have my floor risers in this car. I did this on purpose. No, we're gonna put the subframe connectors because on Detroit Speed in the directions, if I remember right, we have to cut the seat risers here. We have templates, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna go ahead and start cutting the templates out. We're gonna lay them in place and you'll just see a general idea on how this process works, and then we'll go ahead and finish tacking in our last bar on our roll cage and really tie this car all together. So let's get to the work on these subframe connectors. So the first couple steps in this process is pretty much how to level your car out and get it at ride height and make sure the car's not bowing. We can skip all that because we're on a chassis jig and the car's already been leveled on here and everything's just built straight. So this is exactly where we want our car. We don't have to do any of this stuff. So the first step that we're starting on is we're basically using some templates you see at the bottom here and some magnets and pushing our templates against the floor pan on the bottom because that's our reference point in how the kit's designed, and then we're basically tracing it, and I'm going to just use a cutoff wheel and we're basically just cutting out the whole line that we created. Once we do that, we're going to take our plates out and we're going to start test fitting the subframe connectors in there. This is going to be cut less first type of deal, and you could go back through with a flap disc or something and just clean it up a little bit at a time. My favorite thing about these subframe connectors from Detroit Speed is you'll see once we start installing them, they're very low profile. So I like the fact that they kind of come through the floor pan. It doesn't really bother the carpet. Like, you can't really see them once the carpet and padding are down, but then if you look under this car, it gives you very optimal ground clearance. You know, there's some cars that really drag some subframes and the headers hang real low, so we're trying to, with these cars now, we're lowering them down, get everything up. I think this is a perfect thing for that. What I decided to do on installing these, and I've done this in the past, is you could see I kind of pushed the subframe connector all the way back as far as it would go. I used a monkey on the stick, and then what I did, I tacked the rear bottom of the subframe connector to the frame rail in the back exactly where I want it, and then once I get 2 tacks in the bottom, I get a jack under the front and I lift it up off the frame jig, and I'm gonna put this at the exact level I want. So that's gonna level it out with the front of the top of the front subframe area. So the subframe connector, top of that matches the front subframe, you'll see in a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and tack it to the floor. What I'm going to do on this side is basically the same exact thing. You can see I kind of just notched it in there. It fits really good. I do also kind of like to notch out the back of that toe pan area where your feet go down under the rear seat. I feel like it just, the subframe connector fits in better if you notch that out versus it kind of just rolling onto the edge of that whole section. So it's just something I do. I don't think the directions even said anything about that, but what I did, same thing on this one. We're tacking the back, and you'll see right now, once it's pushed back, I'll let off the monkey on the stick. It'll relieve the pressure, and then we'll take the jack under there, lift it right up to the right height. You don't want to get it too high now. You're not trying to push up the floor. And then once you get everything set, I'm going to take the MIG welder, because again, this isn't chromoly. This is back to the MIG welding. So everything with the subframe connectors is going to be MIG welded. We're using the proper heat settings, and we're using 030 filler wire, and we're going to just tack in around the floor pan. That's also just tacking in this floor pan area going to allow us to just kind of just slightly move it up or down to fine tune it once we get the front brackets in the next step ready to install. Just make sure everything fits. Also tacking this now, if for some reason we have to remove these, everything's going to be removable without cutting the whole entire floor out. Once you weld these things in, that's the bad thing about these subframe connectors. I had a car come in the shop one time, and they are actually, the front clip was welded in the car crooked a little bit. There's really no cutting these subframe connectors out without replacing the floor and doing major damage. That, I mean, you can fix them, but it's, again, this is a big job for something that just hung out the bottom like I've done with other subframe connectors. Just replace them real quick. So these are the front brackets. Like I said, they're kind of, there's a, on these brackets, there's an inside and an outside version of the bracket. So read the directions, they're numbered. It makes it really simple. There's also, going back, a right subframe connector and a left subframe connector. They're specific on the sides of the car. Make sure you read the directions and don't get them backwards. It's going to be a bad day. But you can see, this is what I was saying earlier about just getting the top of the subframe connector lined up with the front subframe itself. We're going to put these extension brackets on there, and I'm leaving a very slight gap so I get really good penetration through both of this welding process. What I'm going to do also, I'm going to make sure I weld the inside and outside of that bracket. Before we do that though, I'm sitting there, this is what I was telling you, we're going to do our last supports on this roll cage. What this is going to do, this is going to take the load off just those rockers and put it in what I feel is one of the strongest parts of the car now, minus that shock tower brace. And it's going to tie all this in. So the whole back clip of the car is now tied into those center subframes running to the front clip of the car. We have the solid bushings in the front clip of the car, and the reason we really just use those bushings is just to locate everything. But now that everything's tied in, this is the way to do it. This car is going to drive so much better. It's going to handle so much better and just be an all-around, I think, better ride with the upgrades we're doing. And then safety wise, now we kind of put a V in it. We triangulated this area, again, the back seats in the car, just to make sure everything comes in and out for aesthetic reasons, but we're just tacking everything in, and that's going to give it the strength and security I think we need in the roll cage to add on to just the rocker. So now that everything's tacked in, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start TIG welding this too. This area, I'm on the foot pedal, and then what I'm going to do once we get in here, I'm going to transition to the trigger switch. And you see right now, I could tape a foot pedal to here, but really being upside down and these tight areas, this is what I was just talking about. It's just easier to just throw the trigger switch in there and just try to really work the filler in there and move along with the speed quite fast to just keep the heat out of it. If I'm worried about the heat, we could stop for a little bit and let the whole pipe itself cool down. But I was watching the heat affected zone, and I think everything worked out pretty good on TIG welding these parts in there. Like I said, they were a little bit challenging, especially the bottom of this joint. I really had to stick it out, the tungsten, extra far on that. Same thing on the bottom. Don't forget we're mild steel to chromoly, so this is going to be the same process as in the back. It is a little bit thicker here, so I did turn up the amps. I believe it was 105 amps, and what I was doing, I was staying mostly on the subframe and kind of working the puddle up, where I'm not exactly dead center. I think that worked out a little bit better, kind of feeding the puddle up and adding my filler material. It's one of those things, once you start welding, you'll get used to it's easier just to do it and see what the puddle's doing and how it reacts, to just go ahead and tell you. Now that these two bars are welded in, the whole roll cage itself, minus the areas I couldn't reach till we blow the external panel apart, are completely welded. We're going to turn our attention now to the MIG welding of the floor pans into the subframe connectors. What I'm doing, I like to use a little bit more heat, and I'm focusing again mostly my arc on the subframe connector, and I'm kind of just walking it down, letting it fall down onto the floor pan where I'm getting really good penetration. And you see, for the most part, I could almost run a pretty straight, consistent bead. I think it came out really good. It matches the rest of the welding on the car. We are putting a floor carpet in this thing, but in general, I'm proud enough on this car. I would leave these welds exposed if it was a race car and let everyone see them. I think they come out really good. I'm not going to clean them up. There's no reason to, and I think they're going to be plenty strong for what we're trying to do. Same thing on this side. There's some weird angles, but with the MIG welder, it's a little bit easier than the TIG welder. I will say, if that might be something that you choose. If you choose to use a DOM or a mild steel roll cage versus the chromoly, MIG welding might be a really good option, because you could see with the MIG welder, you could pretty much pull the trigger, and if you can't even get your welding held in there, I've closed my eyes, welded backwards, everything else. The process is a little bit easier. The TIG welder, it's just getting in the corners and being uncomfortable. So next time you go to somewhere and you see someone's cage isn't perfect, stacked dimes, as people would say, think about if they were upside down, backwards, trying to TIG weld a roll cage in. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the video. on the 69 Firebird, installing the Chromoly Roll cage and the Detroit Speed subframe connectors. Looking around underneath, everything looks good. Everything is welded up, MIG welded. Underneath, we're gonna have to go back through. We're gonna clean up everything just a little bit, but it'll probably be when this car goes on a rotisserie down the road. Looking at the roll cage, I'm happy with the roll cage. It's not any NHRA certified roll cage, but in general, I think it's gonna do the pro touring style that I'm looking for on this car. Everything there is mostly welded up. There's a couple areas on the edges on some of these bars that I'm gonna have to come back through and we're gonna re-weld it. Now, I just couldn't get the TIG welder in there, and when we pull these quarter panels off, because I still have to, this was just the initial fitment of the external panels, nothing, like I said, is welded earlier. That is gonna enable us, and that just got us in there to test fit the cage, the headliner, and just make sure everything's gonna work. Now that the cage is welded in, the car is solid. Between the frame jig underneath and the roll cage right now, this car is not going anywhere. So we're gonna pull these panels off. We're gonna finish welding up the roll cage. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna scuff everything up and clean it off one more time, and we're gonna epoxy prime the whole inside of this car. So that will probably be on the next video. I'll probably just have all the cleanup and welding done, and I'll start the next video with the epoxy priming, because the next video on this car is gonna be putting on all the external sheet metal and welding it up, and really this car will be finally together and in general done with the major body components. So I'm gonna go back. You can see with the roll cage, we're not trying to keep anything factory stock. So there's gonna be a lot of custom stuff done on this Firebird. I just want this thing to be really trick, real modern looking. So I'm gonna throw some more stuff at it. You see on the channel, we do a lot of these other cars that are mostly factory replacement. So this car is kind of the over the top car, the Firebird. So thank you for sticking along. I know this video wasn't super detailed, but it's just a roll cage. There's nothing that crazy about it. If you're putting a roll cage in your car, maybe some tips and tricks that can help you out with chromoly, or you could do it mild steel. There's not a huge difference. Like I said, the chromoly is going to be a little bit stronger, so you could go a little thinner on the wall tubing. But again, driving around the street, not the end of the world. If you're using mild steel, you might want to go 1 5/8, 120 wall versus the 090, 083 wall that we went with the chromoly. So thanks again for sticking along, watching the video. Hope it was enjoyable. We'll come back on the Firebird. Like I said, we'll do the external skins and everything. If you like this kind of content, please like the video. It helps us out in the algorithm. And please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. That again helps us out and helps me get motivated to put more videos out. So I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars, and I'll see you on the next build video on this car or the next one. Take it easy.